Welcome to the BBC's Greatest Hits on Jeremy Corbyn. Coming in at number 6, we have the time the BBC used Photoshop to liken Jeremy Corbyn to Donald Trump.
When you're talking about the impact on the economy, you've got to take care of, yes, of business that wants to have the free movement, but you also need to think about people whose wages are being undercut.
Now remember, for that to have happened, a BBC employee must have scoured the internet or scoured the BBC archives to find the perfect photo to place Jeremy Corbyn under that Donald Trump hat. And then that must have been signed off by a BBC editor. And all before they've blown buckets of licence fee money resurrecting Kirsty Wark. On to number 5, we have another Photoshop jobby from the BBC.
We do get the facts right, and we know that the kind of crony capitalism in Russia and the kind of oligarchy.
I think the difference is he wasn't unequivocal, and his front bench were. You know, we heard from Neil Griffiths, we heard from Emily Thornberry.
So is Corbyn a billionaire bigot or a communist stooge? Because I'm confused. Now remember, the BBC has form here. For example, this is how the BBC World Service describes Jeremy Corbyn to 75 million overseas listeners.
Another part of the European left was not only left in its economic outlook, but was actually very anti-Western, anti-NATO, pro-Soviet Union. And Jeremy Corbyn is in that camp, in the latter camp.
Yet it's the Conservatives that have refused Labour amendments to crack down on Russian assets in the UK. I wonder why.
Over £800,000 worth of donations to the Conservative Party from Russian oligarchs and their associates.
Number 4 comes in 3 days before the 2017 general election, and Jeremy Corbyn had leapt 20 points in the polls, an unprecedented surge. Then the BBC decided to censor a musician's pro-Corbyn t-shirt.
I wear circa waves and we stand in Manchester.
I'm sending my prayers to the victims and families who have endured this horrible tragedy in Manchester. Stay strong, and I stand with Manchester.
Hi, we're Clean Bandit, and we stand with Manchester.
So, the BBC says that impartiality rules during an election mean that it just had to censor that musician's t-shirt. Now remember, it uses that same logic when an anti-Theresa May song, Captain Scar Liar Liar, reached number 1 in the charts during the election. The BBC used these so-called impartiality rules to blur out the play button on their website and to refuse to play the song on their radio airwaves. The thing is, we all know that if an anti-Corbyn song, You Communist Flannel, reached number 10, they'd be playing it all day. Next up, we have number 3, which happened on the very same day as the previous entry, and it's another Photoshop initiative from the BBC.
In 2001, Mr Corbyn joined Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell and Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott in voting against putting Al-Qaeda on a government list of proscribed terrorist organisations.
So, superimposing Corbyn next to the world's most notorious terrorist must have been appropriate for maintaining that impartiality. And Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, Diane Abbott were voting in line with Liberty, other human rights charities and minority groups when they voted against prescribing Al-Qaeda in 2001, because it was part of blanket legislation prescribing 21 other organisations, some of which prescribing them was described as an attack on free speech, an attack of freedom of assembly. Now, bring on criticism of Corbyn's policies, but photoshopping him on the Kremlin skyline with Donald Trump merchandise on his heads and next to Osama bin Laden, that's just lousy propaganda. Dropping in at number 2, we have the time the BBC orchestrated the on-air resignation of one of Corbyn's shadow ministers.
Has also led others to be considering walking out the door, and one of them is Stephen Doughty.
Are you considering your position, Mr Doughty?
I've just written to Jeremy Corbyn to resign from the front bench.
Then a Daily Politics editor posted on the BBC Academy website that BBC political editor Laura Kuenssberg and BBC presenter Andrew Neil had coordinated together to get the resignation to happen on national television. Daily Politics editor Andrew Alexander wrote in the swiftly deleted post, "I wonder, mused our presenter Andrew Neil, if they would consider doing it live on the show." He continued, "Within the hour we heard that Laura had sealed the deal. Stephen Doughty would resign live in the studio." Now, coming in at number 1, we have the time the BBC used the fact that JK Rowling was campaigning to take down Jeremy Corbyn on Twitter to video edit this.
Do you see? Let me speak to him. Master, you are not strong enough. I have strength enough for this.
It's important to note that these are not isolated incidents, but examples of structural bias at the BBC. A number of studies represent an academic consensus that BBC coverage is generally opposed to progressive politics. For example, a pre-Corbyn major content analysis from Cardiff University revealed that the BBC is pro-business and conservative-leaning in its coverage, no matter which party is in power. Another academic study, this time from Goldsmiths, looked at media coverage of Labour and anti-Semitism this summer. The Media Reform Coalition found numerous examples of false statements alongside distorted and inaccurate reporting from the BBC. That concludes the BBC's greatest hits on Jeremy Corbyn. Hit me up on Twitter at @WrightIsMight, and if you're not following The Canary, quit sleeping. It's @TheCanary UK.